All right, well, hi everybody. My name is Mikey Lynch. I lead the staff team of the Uni Fellowship of Christians, AFES ministry in Hobart, working with local students and those with higher English competency. And this is other members of the staff who we work together with students to run our work down here in Tassie. Christine Jolly, what's your role with the Uni Fellowship team?
Hi, I coordinate our fellowship groups, small groups of 2 to 5 students who gather together weekly to read the Bible and pray specifically that God would use them to let Jesus be known through their words and their lives and their actions.
Yeah. And Andrew Maskell.
Yeah, so my role is about raising, training and sending. So I'm responsible for that with the Uni Fellowship and everything kind of connected with it. So I want to create places and spaces and times and moments where we see training to take place, leaders are raised up, evangelism happens. So that's running those with a purpose is my passion. Yep.
Yeah. Excellent. So we wanted to do a longer form video and podcast conversation about the state of things at UTAS here in Hobart, especially, although it does affect Launceston and elsewhere in the state as well. And that was triggered by an announcement that came out on the 5th of November of this year in the ABC News reporting. The article was University of Tasmania walks away from plans to move entirely from Sandy Bay into central Hobart. That was an announcement that didn't come as an enormous surprise, but it did clarify changes we were noticing about whether the planned complete move into a city centre campus would ever take place. That there were rumblings across the year, but then this was announced. The way it was framed was that there would be 4 sites contingent upon government funding, 4 sites that UTAS would have across the city. A STEM campus at Sandy Bay, which would require a complete retrofit of existing buildings and some new buildings. A city campus built around the existing medical sciences and creative arts buildings, plus the forestry building, which is currently being renovated and stuff, which will be home for business, economics, humanities and social sciences. Previous articles had said that law is staying at Sandy Bay. So that STEM campus presumably also includes the law campus, although there's no mention of that in this article. The third of these new sites would be the historic campus on the Hobart's Queen's Domain, featuring international school, outdoor education program and parts of health like paramedics and nursing. And then a waterfront campus centred around the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies facilities at Taroona and on Hobart's waterfront. So that's the new announcement. It gives clarity that this is likely, if we stick to this is likely where UTAS is going to be for the next maybe 10 years or more, or at the very least, what we're currently experiencing is going to continue to be the normal, which is not a complete city move, nor a complete Sandy Bay return or majority Sandy Bay return. So that was the announcement, and because that was sufficiently definitive and specific in details, we thought it was kind of a good moment for us to stop and talk about our reactions to that announcement. But it's larger kind of implications as well to things we've already been noticing, already been dealing with, running Christian evangelism and training ministry through the AFES here in Hobart. I mean, one thing immediately, my thought, and then I'll hear what you guys have to say, is it is important to clarify that what they call 4 sites is really more like 8. The waterfront campuses at Hobart and Taroona, that's talking from Salamanca to Taroona. That's a long bike ride, and depending on the traffic, even a noticeable car drive. Not really one site. Similarly, when you think of the Hunter Street Fine School of Art, the Hedberg, the Menzies building, and then the forestry building, that's really 3 sites at least, with significant gaps between them. So calling them 4 sites, we're really dealing more like 8, a very diffuse future. What are your thoughts and reactions to that announcement? Who wants to go first? Christine, Andy? Christine.
Well, I mean, one comment is
Andy.
Sorry.
No,
Christine,
right.
do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
One comment on that is simply when you're also on the ground, it's different when you're on the map as well. So on the map, it's like they're zoomed out on Google, and it can look like it is quite close, that it's quite integrated, that certain buildings are all nice and close to each other, with the hope that it will create these connections. But when you're actually standing down there, you're like, oh, it's going to take me 15 minutes up that hill to walk to that building across this highway. And so psychologically, when you're there on the ground, it feels even further. So that's
I mean,
an
even just
extra
the
hurt.
music school to the med school, it's like a longish block away. And so you
Yep.
wouldn't really think of like the music school and the med school as being one place quite, would you? You know, yeah.
No, that's right. And so that's
And
going
why
to be,
would the two interact as well?
yeah, they're going to be extra
Med orchestra.
hurdles by way of creating student interaction and crossover, and there being these kind of student zones, because the space is just too big.
Yeah, Christine, your thoughts?
The real challenge is that when emerging students, so current students as well as the next generation or two of students, they're not going to have the same experience of university as their parents and grandparents did. When we were at uni, we were rubbing shoulders and bumping into people who were studying electrical engineering, and I was studying fine arts, and we were sitting a table away from each other in the cafeteria. And conversations were being overheard on the green or in the library that were not relevant necessarily to what you were studying, but it was expanding your experience of the world. And so the challenge is going to be that UTAS is going to have to put in the extra effort into those community spaces. And while they may be dispersed, what are they going to do actually and practically to bring a diversity of students together, so you get the actual purpose of university to expose you to different ideas and people that you wouldn't have in your family group or in your community or in your faith community even. So that's a real challenge that I haven't heard them address at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's one, on one level we need to admit, like, universities are never great at that community thing anyway, because that's never, universities never worked before because universities were great at it. They worked before because it just so happened the model involved large integrated campuses where it happened without trying, and so it's more that university has slowly eroded those things, removing common lunch hours, making, on in-person presence optional, hybrid learning, all these things, all of that erodes it. This will erode it further, as you say, through this diffusion of campuses and specialties. And then you suddenly have an institution having to do what it was never that good at, which is trying to bring people back together. And we've seen some of the post-COVID UTAS attempts at that, and it's limited in its ability. Look, it is worth saying UTAS has always had some degree of diffusion. So when I was at UTAS, the later years of the med degree were all at the clinical school in the city. And then when I came back to work for AFES, by that stage, even the first years were also starting. Their whole med degree was always separate from the Sandy Bay, from other disciplines. And that was a downside, but that's what it was. Music school, even when I was there, the Conservatorium of Music was completely its own world, and the School of Fine Arts was completely its own world. So there already was these little pockets, kind of little schools on their own. But you noticed it back then. You really did notice that the con experience, the Conservatorium of Music experience, was totally different for all the degrees that were like what Christine was describing, intermingling in Sandy Bay. You noticed the difference when med students no longer had a year mingling with others. Increasingly, med became this hermetically sealed thing, and so on. Yeah. So there's always been a bit of that with UTAS. It's ramped up, and then UTAS forced it by putting like the business school into office blocks that they're renting in the city, to gesture at the move that would happen. Yeah, I mean, we were open to the possibility that a full city move could have worked, weren't we? We weren't total like save UTAS is the only optimal solution. What's different about a full UTAS move to the city compared to this, or really 8 sites kind of retreat that UTAS has found itself in now?
I think one of the hopes with an all-in is that there's just more of a critical mass.
Yeah.
And that is just crucial for social cohesion, for connecting, sharing ideas, and having a sense of that I'm a student, this is a student life, this is the place where I student and live my life in and out of. And so that will also then just spin off to facilitate a whole bunch of other things. Whereas when you don't have that critical mass, well, then they're diffused, they're spread out. So you don't have enough people at Sandy Bay campus, but then you don't quite have enough people anywhere else. And then when you don't quite have enough people everywhere, then people just basically don't stick and stay and hang and meet, and then they just go home.
Yeah, the design for the full city campus as well, for those familiar with the Sandy Bay campus in Hobart, there's like a central mall that runs from the Lazenby's Cafe right down to Ovals at the bottom and the law school. And then even behind that, there's like overpasses that run up the hill to residential colleges up the top of College Road. And so there's this kind of, although it's quite separate, and, you know, people in life sciences on the other side of Churchill Avenue will, of course, have a lot less to do with law students down by the Oval. There still is the possibility that someone doing life sciences is dating someone doing law in the middle, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The plan was like that there were these parkways and walkways so that you could theoretically go from fine arts up past Hedberg, past Menzies, across diagonally through where arts is going to be to the library, and then out to the A&D building, and could kind of snake your way through a few city blocks. It still was pretty spread, but at least there were these kind of continuities, whereas that plan is not the plan now.
There will still be, I think, some of that, and it'll be interesting to see how that does play out. I think the advantage at Sandy Bay campus is you've got a bit of a heart, and that is there's Lazenby's and there's the library, and so that's this central point which will drag people together or make people go there because, well, I've got to go to the library, or it's just nice to come and hang out on the grass. So that those points are kind of magnets. So there's a question mark over the design in the city, whether it will just end up being nice walkways. Will it be a good enough reason to pull people in and then keep people in? We'll have to see.
Yeah, so that's the plan. The benefit of having some clarity on it is that we all know to some degree that talking about UTAS all being in the city is not the conversation to be having in the midterm, probably even the long term. Yeah, like that conversation, unless things radically change. Again, we've got to say, let's stop thinking in terms of UTAS all being in the city. That's been on the cards since, you know, what 5 years plus. You know, we've got to stop thinking about that. But we've also got to stop thinking, it seems, about things ever going back to UTAS with a heavy dominance in Sandy Bay. And even that was waning. And so this is the interesting thing, right? What we're seeing is a bunch of things have started to happen. Culture's changing anyway. People are working more part-time, more mature age students coming back to retrain. Those changes are happening anyway. Technology has changed the way people behave. Higher standards of living change where people want to go for food and coffee. People are living further out from the city for affordability reasons. Even the parents of school leavers may now not live and buy within easy walking, driving, riding distance in the city campuses. So there's that. You know, there's lots of other factors. The move to the hybrid learning model that UTAS has adopted increasingly since COVID, that committed this flipped classroom type thing to varying degrees. There's all these factors going on, plus anything that's unique to Tassie as a demography, and so lots of things going on. But what we're seeing is that those changes and the acceleration of those changes, that's the future, at least for the midterm. Yeah. We're going to be dealing with young adults, uni students, churches connected with uni students, will be living in this kind of city now for years to come. And so we need to work out, well, what does social life, young adult networking, community, uni student ministry, churches with uni students. What's that look like? What do you guys noticed are some of these then the differences we've noticed to have really accelerated since the COVID lockdowns and exacerbated by all those kind of factors I've kind of rattled off? What are some of the noticeable differences from those who maybe went to uni or had some connections with UTAS or other AFS groups in the past? Christine.
So economic factors apply to choices that even 18 and 19, 20-year-olds will make. So one of the changes that we've seen in the past 5 years is a lot more young adults living at home. So if they choose to study locally instead of going interstate or overseas for their university degree, they're often staying at home with their parents and amongst their siblings, which means that it's more cost effective, but they're often still having family commitments, being home for family dinner and participating in family holidays, also being involved still in their local church and local church ministries. And so just those alone mean that a desire and a pursuit to find community and to find attachments to new relationships has diminished significantly when it comes to being involved in a university specific mission. It's not filling a met need. But then you have the economic factor as well of those who are coming from interstate or from up north who maybe were lucky enough to get one of the rooms that the university has provided. It's still super expensive. And so in order to meet those economic needs, they're having to take on 2 to 3 part-time jobs, which is also a time commitment that is being taken away from being able to engage socially, making new friends and clubs and societies on campus. And as a result, because the majority of their time is taken up with actually working 2, 3 part-time jobs, their primary identity has become as a part-time worker, doing a little bit of university study on the side, often in their bedroom and not in person in class. And so those 2 factors have created a vastly different experience for us as ministry workers trying to connect with university age Christians and non-Christians.
Yeah. And it is interesting as well that out on that parents living at home compared to the share house, especially a share house close to campuses, is like when I was a student, but even when I began working with the Uni Fellowship of Christians, most years you'd kind of, for example, have the boys share house and the girls share house, and they might host social events, evangelistic courses, growth groups, but also do all that informal evangelism where, what are you doing? I finished class, I'll go and see if anyone's at the boys' house. And if everyone's busy, I can still just flop in their lounge room and do some of my study, or, suddenly then we're having a theological debate or blah, blah, blah. It all just kind of invite your non-Christian mate and then they're joining in playing Mario Kart, all that kind of stuff. Except for those family homes that are close enough and have the floor plan and the culture that welcomes hangout zones. Yeah, that's all gone too, which is quite a difference. And the residentials, as you mentioned, some of them can be quite good, but you would know, Christine, having been a residential fellow at Jane Franklin Hall, that was just big enough, wasn't it? That kind of high 100s, 200-ish students. That's enough to be able to then do like evangelistic event or a Christian Bible study, and kind of there's enough dynamic in that thing. But that was quite a Hogwarts style classic college
and
context.
Super insular. You rarely bring anybody from the outside in.
Yeah. It was big enough that didn't matter because it could do its own thing, right? Whereas some of these places, because they're more apartmentsy, even if they do have some social dynamic, the risk could be it's not quite big enough to be able to be a ministry site of its own, but it's sufficiently insular and self-contained to meet your needs enough. So it's like the family issue you were saying, where it's like, I've got a couple of friends and a couple of Christian mates, and it's kind of enough to tick the box, but not enough to get a mission movement really kind of rolling. And often they're swipe in, swipe out places that don't have, aren't quite as easy to facilitate the mission that you could do at Jane Franklin Hall, because it was sort of like a a para-university institution, so it could broker its own partnerships, whereas these things, it's often like it's UTAS or it's no go. Yeah, and so that's an interesting one to observe as well, that you want the residential city to be big enough that it can be its own ministry hub, but if it's not quite that big enough, that it ends up and just being a gated community. Yeah. Andy, any other thoughts on some of these changes and how we've noticed its impact on ministry culture?
I mean, I echo everything. I mean, I think building on that, one change is that when you've lost this central place, these good gathering locations, and locations that are accessible, and you feel like you can stay around and you can kind of set up shop to study and sort of kind of live and breathe in that way. When you lose that, and then you start going, all right, well, I'm at home, I'm online, I'm working more, your life retreats increasingly actually from the university, and your life is formed and directed, and who you are is by kind of just what you're deciding to do, rather than you are going to a place for the whole day and you're carried along, or you're directed, or you're set up, or you're formed by everything that's taking place. And so I think the subtle shift that we're beginning to observe is that university becomes one of the number of things that I do as a young person, rather than I am a uni student and all of me is uni student. And so there's a shift there, which then means the level of engagement in university things changes. So one quick example is societies don't make so much sense in your life, because you're not going to a place and staying the whole day or the whole week at a place. So why do I need to join that chess group, or even go to that gym, or be a part of that particular political group, or whatever it may be? I've already got my own life over here, or my other group of mates, or my other hobby, or things that I'm into. And so then that starts kind of peeling apart. And so there's kind of social impacts like that I think we're beginning to observe.
It's a little bit, one helpful way of describing it is a school leaver uni student, and there's variation, but more of them look a lot more like what a TAFE student or a mature age student would look like. So I'm going to TAFE.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm studying at uni, but I've got my life. Yeah, I'm just doing this as a part of it. In a sense, that's much more, if not most, uni students now, even school leavers, 18-year-olds, and they might join a club, but it might just be because you haven't got round to joining a gym before, or you haven't got round, you would like to do some bushwalking. It's not really part of that identity. It's just one convenient way to access a goods or service provider, if you like, rather than it being part of a lifestyle. Yeah.
And I think within this as well, it's no longer really clearly black and white. I am a student, I'm not a student. There's this spectrum where you go, some people, a whole bunch of people are still experiencing that. Like, for instance, if you're in engineering, right, you're in a lot of the time, you're having a similar taste of a bit what it was like before, but all the way down to going, I'm in a few times a week, I'm in once a week, I'm in once every couple of weeks, so I'll kind of just go in only if I need to. And so you've got this spectrum of what a university experience is happening. And so then everybody's experience is really different. And so kind of what everybody wants or doesn't want from university, again, is really, really different. So there's just this huge diversity of what it means to be a student in Tasmania now compared to previously. So that's a shift in people's minds again, to kind of go, oh, hang on a second, I need to put a category of sort of 18 to 24-year-old more first, and going, they're doing life in this age and they're doing a number of things in this age group, rather than they're just a student doing all the student things at a single student place.
Yeah, so let's move to that label thing, because it is, I think, true that if you said uni students, even to a group of people of whom all of them studying at uni, not necessarily all of them would emotionally start listening to what comes next.
Yeah.
Because of the reasons you just said. There you go. So for uni students here, and some people would self-select out of that descriptor, like a mature age student might. They're going, yeah, I'm a uni student, but they're not really talking to me. And so you're suddenly, or if they connect with it, they're not emotionally connecting with the label. You know what I mean? So you're going, well, you know, a bit like someone who lives in a suburb because that's where they could afford to live. But if you said now to residents of blah blah suburb, they'd self-select out because they don't emotionally go, like, I'm here just because I could afford it. I don't see myself as a, you know, a local. You know, as soon as I could, you know, do up the house and sell and move, I will. My life's elsewhere. Were you about to say something, Christine? Did I see your?
No.
No. Yeah, so let's talk about this label then, that uni student may not be always the most helpful label. And if we keep using that kind of terminology, and especially talk about ministry and evangelism on the campus or at UTAS, everything we've said says, well, there is no on campus in any single or even sort of simplistic way, really. And at UTAS as a place means as much online through the online course delivery as it means in person in a lecture or tutorial room. So that way of thinking that is so, I mean, I'm sure many people pray for us and give to us and imagine that what we're doing is exactly what they experienced when they were uni students. Lunchtime sermons every week in a lecture theatre, Bible studies on campus, in classroom spaces, stalls running 9 till 3, handing out flyers and giveaways, and hanging out on the lawn, walking up evangelism, all that kind of stuff. That's what people envision us doing. It's like that, you know, that meme, you know, what I do, what my parents think I do, what my friends think I do. It's kind of like that. But some of us can't break those images in our head. But it's just very, very different now. And part of it then is how we talk, you know, that talking about at UTAS, on campus, uni student. Now, Andy suggested that an age bracket and certain sort of milestone markers is one way of thinking about it. Christine, do you want to expand on that a little? What are your thoughts on some of the different terminologies or frameworks of clarifying who's our ministry and mission to in Hobart now that UTAS is in such a different zone?
I will take it, for example, the fellowship group that I was leading this past semester. Those who engaged with us the most deeply this past semester, I noticed a couple of variables that were similar that are worth bringing up. So that'll help paint a picture.
Right.
So those who engaged with us initially and stuck were a group of 5 students. There was one student who was like the first category that I mentioned. She's a local student who is from the local area, goes to a local church, and she's chosen to live with her family and her siblings, and has lots of family, and then also travel constraints, not quite having her own full license yet, kind of dependent on a parent to drop her off in the city if they're heading that way, or figuring out the bus timetable. And so if a lot of our students whose families can afford not to live in the inner city but outer city, a lot of students are traveling 20 to 30 minutes to come into class.
Can I pause on that as well? This is one downside to not having a full city move, is there's less put pressure on the councils to radically transform parking and public transport options. We've lost that. So those who are coming to the city, I know someone who's at music school, and they talk about the Hedberg shuffle, which is everyone goes out, changes their cars around, reviews the meters, you know, warns against the traffic inspectors, because we haven't moved to the city to force an infrastructure upgrade to make it easy to do what Christine's describing. And we won't now have the pressure and incentive to do that caused by gridlock and all that kind of stuff. So that's another little missed thing that's happened. But yeah, keep going, Christine. So that's one person, that kind of commuter student.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a lot of challenges just to get her on campus and to stay on campus, like what you mentioned with the parking, or her schedules might also be dictated by the bus schedule. If she's living 20 to 30 minutes out, those buses only come every hour. And if one's coming up and she has to wait a whole another hour before the next one, She's making some choices about, do I go home now or do I stick around? And often, if she can't think of a reason to stay, she might just go home. Well, the fellowship groups gave her a reason to stay. It also gave her a reason to come onto campus in the first place. We were delighted one week when we were just talking around the table and said, like, oh, so what classes do you have on today? And she's like, I don't actually have anything. And one of the other fellowship group members was just like, what? You mean you came in just for this? And we were all just, our hearts were just like, oh, we love you too.
That's gorgeous. Yeah.
So there's a lot of challenges, and she's one who came at the very beginning and she's stuck. The other 4 in the group are not from Hobart, and so they were keenly looking for ways to connect with other Christians during their week. Not being from Hobart, they were in the process of looking for a local church to go to, finding that a particular struggle, trying one week, not quite sticking, skipping it the next week because something came up, someone invited them on a bushwalk. Trying another one the next week. 6 months in, some of them were still talking about a struggle. So the fellowship group became their moment to connect with other Christians during the week, which made a challenge for me to constantly keep on top of this conversation, this discipleship conversation. Like, it is, that feeling that you feel when you come in to meet with us and pray and read the Bible and connect. It is worthwhile making similar efforts on a Sunday to connect with a local body of Christ, so that you're getting fed richly from the reading and the explaining of God's word. You are being encouraged by singing in unison with other believers of different ages and stages in life who are on about the same things of loving Jesus and loving others through song. So that became a real discipleship opportunity. Commuters coming in and finding community and finding reasons to stay, but also people who were from outside the Hobart area who didn't already have those connections and were craving it.
Yeah. And we notice less engaged are those in churches. We've noticed a few churches now with very robust ministries to young adults, often then pulling in people from other churches still into these kind of hubs. That's really thrived noticeably more since COVID. But often the local commuter students who find their way into the fellowship are either those who are not at those churches or who just don't fit into that, for whatever reason, don't quite vibe with those groups at the church level, and find something extra in this kind of thing. So, there are these people still that need to be reached and ministered to. And it's got to be said, the sociology of UTAS now, in a bunch of ways, the online learning, the diffuse geography, none of that stuff helps habit formation. Remember how hard it was for some people struggling, say, with mental illness during COVID? The disruption of regular routines and going in and out and whatever made it really hard to sleep well, eat well, exercise. It really had negative impact. In some ways, UTAS prolongs that for people at this stage of life where they're just at the beginning of forming these habits. And if they're then moving to a whole new place and they don't have geography and sociology and timetables that force just normal human well-being practices, it's already hard for an 18-year-old to actually get it together and go to church once they've moved out of home. How much harder when all these other factors aren't helping you? It makes it harder still. And this is maybe just a bit of a sidebar, but Andy, you were talking about the university town experience in the UK and how churches would really maximize that connection point thing. I'll get you to talk about that. But what we need to ponder is now, for all these reasons, because you don't get a critical mass coming on any single Sunday or two, it becomes harder how to learn from the UK experience when one of these members of Christine's fellowship group might not rock up till 6 weeks after the start of the college year, But it is worth hearing the UK thing, just to challenge churches to think, what is the version of this that we can do in a very different context to the UK? So, Andy, in the UK, most people move to go to a university town to study, and that's true in the US too, Christine. What do churches do at the start of a university year in order to effectively welcome and integrate, especially Christians, as they move to a university town?
Yeah, sure. So before answering the church, the one thing that the equivalent groups of us will do um, is because they got so many students that are coming, that the ministers or a representative from the church the equivalent would be they would meet us at Sandy Bay campus. They would be there with their multiple cars or their minibus or whatever. And then essentially it's a bit like a holder sign up. And so it's like, come to church A, come to church B, come to church C. And then you choose your adventure, and then they take you to their church. So the churches are helping that transition. They're inviting that. They're wanting to make it as easy as possible. And that will happen for a few weeks in a row. So that's kind of facilitated between the group and the church. Then, as far as the experience of in the UK with the churches, is that really the first number of weeks are set up to help students understand who is the church, what is about, what does it believe, what goes on here. So there's that side of information. Then there is also student meals. So
Meals,
there'll be a lunch after each service that the church puts on to help them find a home. And so there might be someone speaking at that to talk about those things I mentioned and to help them figure out, well, what does it look like to step into this new stage of life? And at least the church that I know of in the UK that I grew up in, they're really keen to see those students make a decision of integrating really quickly into church. So they say, don't keep bouncing around. We'd love to have you. Would you like to stay? Is there a reason why not? Not really. Okay, get stuck in. We're here
Christine,
for you.
you're noticing this, aren't you? Like the people sort of having this plan to check out infinite churches across like 6 months, and then surprise, surprise, they don't land anywhere. What's your advice?
Yeah.
You know, like picking up on that. What's your, as the working at the Christian group level, backing up the pastors on this? Find a church and stick. What would you say to a first year as they move to Hobart?
Yeah, great question. My advice is give yourself a month. And so the first week, commit. The first week you arrive, I'm going to visit a church in the morning and then find a church that has a service in the afternoon or the evening and visit that one too. In your first week, you've already experienced 2 churches. Your second week, why not visit one of those churches back again, and then a second one in the afternoon. By the end of the third week, you might have revisited another one, maybe gone back again. By the fourth one, you have a good idea of at least 2, 3, at most 4 different type churches, their vibe, what their values are, what kind of services they have, what you like, what you don't like. After week 4, a month, you have a good experience with a range of church communities. And if you've been going to uni fellowship or the equivalent AFES type ministry,
to know
you're meeting other students and you're going along to their church too. Maybe they're giving you a lift and you're getting to know their friends at their church and their families. And you like that vibe here, but you're really keen for the music in the afternoon service of this other church. You've got choices that you can make. By the end of the 4th week, my advice is choose one and stick with it for the second month. And then see how you go. There might be something big that comes up in that second month that you think is a deal breaker, and that is okay. Some of these things just happen. But you still have those other 3 or 4 to back up on, or you've made other friends. By your 3rd month, if you're not convinced that you want to stick with this church that you've been to for a month, you've got to choose another one and stick with it for a month, if not. But by the time you go home at the end of the semester, you can then report back to your family, who are probably wondering, hey, what is your church commitment and life like? What different churches have you tried? Have you stuck with one? You can go home and tell Nana and Pop that you've been going to the local Baptist church and it's really lovely. There's been a family who's kind of adopted you, invite them to you're invited weekly to their house for lunch afterwards, but you've got you've surrounded yourself with Christians who love Jesus and his word and love the people of God and want to see Jesus proclaimed across all the nations. And they are going to be there with you, potentially your next 3 years that you're on campus. And they're going to be carrying you along spiritually in partnership, Lord willing, with us and what we're doing at Uni Fellowship.
There it is right there. So now that's the kind of thing we're trying to do. We'd love pastors to be helping us with the same messaging. Now, how do we pick up on the UK thing where, look, if you went on, there's no single place to go to be a taxi rank to take people to church on Sunday. So you can't do that. And there's not the critical mass really to make it worth your time and effort. Not quite. And similarly, you can't, for the reasons we've said, be guaranteed that there's these 3 Sundays where all of the students will all rock up and you can tick those boxes. However, let's zoom back to principles. The principle is intentionality, right? It's deliberately having a plan and implementing it at the start of the year. And you may have to do it for 6 weeks, not 2 or 3. And it may not involve meals or whatever. But yeah, what are some ways that we can do this with the church? I think the baseline one is you should, I reckon, if you're a church in Hobart, we would love it if you prepared your preacher and your MC and your prayer to mention, amongst other things, young adults and uni students in your welcome, in your prayers, in your applications, especially during that season of kind of February, March. Like that would in itself, it says, I see you, you're welcome here, there's a place for you here. That's a baseline thing you could do.
And your welcoming team.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. You're welcome to be ready for them. And I mean, we would love it if you also then were ready with focus subbies and uni fellowship stuff to help those people, like optimize their Christian engagement by both inviting them back to your church next week and saying, have you found the Christian groups on campus yet? I heard a little bit about them, maybe. Well, you really should go to that too. We love those guys. We'd love that, be ready for those little things. And I guess maybe have a plan in the wings that if you notice you've got X number of students, maybe you could have a plan that you go, if we get X number of students, then we activate plan after church lunch for students, and it has to be a bit more reactive. But you have X number, you say, oh, by the way, if you're, new to Hobart, new as a student, we'll be hosting some, and whatever it is, you've got some McCain's French fries, freezer chips and frozen pizza in the church freezer that you just, your hospitality scene, something like that. And then you're ready to go a bit more reactively for the week they all rock up. Something like that could be a way. That's one thought. And any other thoughts like that? What are some creative ways in our smaller, more diffuse setting that the UK lesson be applied?
I'll touch on a bit of a preemptive measure you can do before uni even begins. So something delightful that I saw an American youth pastor do was he was incredibly proactive, because we're all talking in all the churches. There was even a Sydney Anglican article that came out recently, like how are we keeping the youth that are in our churches, how are we keeping them in the faith, not necessarily in our particular church, but keeping them in our ecosystem of evangelical faith and belief and life. So we're all thinking about this. So this is what this one American pastor did. He knew in his particular church which universities most of his students went off to. And he had one of those maps in his office with pegs in the different locations on the American map. And you can just imagine like red string kind of connecting people and places and universities. But he had relationships with students who were already there on the ground that he could connect his year 11 and 12 students with. If they already knew that they were planning on going to this university, he was already making connections, preparing them to go to this university. He also had working relationships with those who were doing some of the main Christian campus mission movements and societies. He already had working relationships with some of the staff there that he would call up and he'd say, okay, I have 3 students who are arriving on campus this fall. These are their names, these are contact details. James is arriving on this date and so is arriving on this date. He also has connections with the local church that's attached to their denomination. He's calling up their young adults pastor and saying, these are the...
Brilliant.
So there's a lot you can do before
Yep.
they go
And
to
we love it,
university
don't we
to
love
help
it
with
when
this
we get
process.
those messages?
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Oh.
Sometimes
Funny
more
thing
so,
is,
like
we
we get a
often
lot
get
of
them
parents
more,
as well.
parents and other
Yeah,
AFES staff, more so than churches, which is funny. We do get
yeah,
some
yeah.
churches, but often it's anxious parents and proactive AFES staff.
Mhm.
We'd love it if we got it from pastors as well. Yeah, and youth leaders and stuff, because these bridge points, right? Any transition
Mhm.
point, you know, Sunday school to youth group
Yeah.
to college group to, yeah, these are all drop-off points. Just like when someone moves city, that's a time when they can also just stop going to church. Yes, this transition to university. So it's such a delicate baton pass point. So as part of your pastoral responsibilities, something like that makes a lot of sense. And even if it's within your own city, and I guess this is an interesting thing to realize, that it might seem to you like nothing's changed. They're still going to church when they're in grade 12. They're still going to church when they're in first year uni in Hobart. But actually something has changed. And it may not happen quite as quickly that they tune out, but they could still, if you don't kind of watch that transition point. Yeah. We go back to this young adult stuff, or did you have any more to say on that church welcome, Andy? No,
I wasn't going to add any more principles, but you know, intentionality on both sides is really crucial. I think just commenting on that though is we've spoken largely about new people coming in, but yeah, really keep an eye on those who are transitioning up from the kind of high school and actually going, they can almost just be a bit forgotten, and you can sort of presume, are they studenting now, presuming they're sort of wanting to still come to church, presuming they still care, presuming maybe they've got in touch with the group, presuming maybe they're going. There can be a lot of presumptions, but actually I wonder what it would be like if they were treated like they had just stepped in that Sunday and actually go,
you think about the differences, right? They've got a car, they've got a license, they can go into a pub, they're now living a very different timetable to school. You know, even high school has more structure than most degrees now.
Yeah.
Their friendship network is at least broadening a little, a lot less often than it used to pre-COVID and whatever, but still it's broadening. There are quite a lot of psychological changes. And if they're going to come to church even on Sunday, they may not be doing it all together with their family every Sunday morning.
And
they
they've
may
got
be
the
going in their
freedom
own
now
car
to say no as an adult as well. Like who's going to make them get out of bed and come on time now? Like it's not necessarily mum and dad.
A lot of identity changes, and that's why we partly because the uni is no longer an identity marker itself, but also partly though because this is such a significant time of life. We're really pushing for the language of young adults as being a really important one for us to explain who we're ministering to, but also urging churches and denominations to have a strategy for, because there's a lot of things in this transition into adulthood that in our culture especially happens at the school leaver point or a bit before if you do apprenticeships, you know, that kind of process. But there's enough things that happen in this next little window that make it worth having in a focused interest in. Yeah, so let's chat a bit about this. Like, let's talk a bit more about what's the value. I mean, obviously it's a thing because we're seeing these young adults groups pop up as well that seem to be getting traction in our city and so on. Thoughts about it? What's some useful things about the category? What's some unhelpful things about the category? You know, all these kinds of things.
I think it is useful because one thing is that it does mark a particular group, a particular transition moment that you go creche, primary, high school or whatever. You have all these categories in these moments and you group them by age and you group them sort of by development. And there is in our society you're 18 to 24-year-old or 25-year-old. Like that's the way society understands that to be young adult, and that is a particular stage and step in life. And just biologically, at the age of 25, that's when your brain finishes its full development as well. So you've got that going on a little bit in the background. So I think it's helpful to
That's about the time a guy starts to go, maybe I can't jump that far. Maybe I shouldn't eat that extra thing.
Yeah. Oh,
roughly
no,
about
that
25.
energy drink, maybe not.
Maybe other people do exist, things like this.
Yeah. And so that is usually the point where university and study and that kind of thing, it has wrapped up or is wrapping up as well. So that's their next educational, and then because of that biological, but then at about the age of 25 as well, because of all those things, you now move from being a dependent child or a dependent adult in a bunch of ways still, is on the whole, to now being independent. Like you've got the job, you've got money coming in, you're in a different rhythm and pattern, you're facing different challenges. What you can say yes and no to changes as well. And at that point, there's 7 years from an 18-year-old as well. That's like quite a slab of time. And again, that's sort of similar to the primary age and whatever we go, yeah, there's this slab of age, and then there's this slab of age, and there's this slab of age. So I think because of the social, biological, just the rhythms and patterns of life, education, like all that stuff, it seems to be a good kind of stamp to mark that out. So I think that's some advantage that it does categorize and name that season of life well.
And that's worthwhile. Even if uni is not essential, it actually is still worthwhile recognizing that group for what it is. Yeah. There are some needs, some developmental process changes, some enough shared experience perhaps, and enough needed input and guidance perhaps to make it worthwhile still having a plan for, even if you're not in a university town at all. It still has some value to it. And there is another way of just defining young adults, which some churches have opted for, and sometimes society speaks about as well, which is a definition which is basically not adolescent and not middle-aged. Basically, another way you could describe that category would be early adulthood or something like that. So it's not so much the young adult or emerging adult, which could be something like the 17 to 23 or 18 to 25, something like that. But instead, it's basically not middle-aged, early adulthood in a broader sense. And there's some sense in which that is meaningful, in the sense that by the time you're middle-aged, there are again biological changes. There's much more statistical likelihood that things around housing, family, coupledom or not, it will be in place. The career trajectory will be in place in a whole different way. There's, in a sense, new transitions you're beginning to have to deal with.
Yeah.
When you start to hit early middle age and so on. So there's some sense in realizing that's a time when there will still be an interest in forming new friendships, looking for new relationships, changing job, or defining who you. So that's the flux, and probably our culture in general. That is delayed a bit more, so you're more likely to find someone a bit older. I mean, even into our age in 30s and early 40s, you're having people still thinking of themselves as kind of liking to think of themselves as young in various ways. There's that interesting thing that adulting was this sort of a millennial kind of joke phrase to capture how I just don't feel like an adult still. So there's reasons why you go, actually, yeah, that does prolong in ways. And if people are pairing up later and delaying certain milestones later, partly for economic reasons and whatever. So that's another category. We've all got pretty strong opinions about why we don't think that's the most useful ministry segmenting category. Maybe, Christine, do you want to dive in on that? What are some thoughts on limitations to that broader definition of young adulthood, ranging really right up to anything after adolescence and before middle age, as a ministry segmenting target? What are some limitations to that?
Well, like you mentioned before, there are certain milestones that we often associate with different levels of maturity and growth, decision-making capabilities, recognition that some of those decisions were really good, or recognition that some of those decisions needed to go back and be retweaked, or they were learning opportunities. Or I learned a new phrase recently. What is it? Flurn. It's a new Gen Z phrase, but it's a core value that the emerging generation has. I've learned through failing. Please let me try. Please let me do something and fail. Don't try and put cushions around me so that I don't fail, but let me try something new, go big or go home. And if I fail, well, that was a learning opportunity. I know better next time not to do that thing.
What was
But
the word?
learn, fail through learning. No,
Okay.
learn through failing. That's one. Learn.
So learn with an F at the start.
Yeah,
Learn.
yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
But I think we can see some trends also in the spiritual formation of this age group, but it's also possibly quite different from previous generations. What seems to be consistent, and I think all of us kind of go through the stage, especially if we grew up as a Christian. There comes a point when you do gain independence, but if we're still living at home, you know, with our siblings, our younger siblings, and our parents, that might be extended a little bit later. But all of us at some point in our young adulthood, when we reach that stage of independence where we're no longer daily influenced 90% by those we grew up with, even if it comes to our pastor or youth group leader, Sunday school teacher, growth group leader, when we're off on our own, realizing that we make real life choices that affect our financial budget, but also our spiritual trajectory. If you never get to the point where you actually own your own faith, and ask yourself the hard questions of, is the faith of my parents, my family, my pastor, my Sunday school teacher, is that actually my own faith? Can I actually, as an adult, a 21-year-old, sign on the dotted line and say, yes, this is still what I believe, and this is still what I intend to practice for the rest of my life? We got to make those opportunities for our young adults. We can't put those cushions around them, and in some sense, we have to be okay with our young adults learning, even in the spiritual formation space.
Yeah. Which might even mean checking out from the faith and checking back in, rather than just keeping them in the building at whatever cost.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of risks with that, is that you can hide in that category. And so by that, I mean,
this is if we extend it to old. Is that where we're going to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as far as like owning your faith personally goes, you can often just remain owning the tradition or the group of friends. And so you can kind of hide actually what's spiritually, what depth is really there. And then I think linked to that as well is that you can just stay younger and more immature as well, in the faith, and even just in life as well. You can just be given a whole bunch of permissions to not do things, or not be given extra responsibility because maybe the church or whatever goes, oh no, they're just the young people. But it's like, oh, but like I'm 27 and married or something like that, you know. Actually, you can be withholding the development and growth of your people, I think, by making this category too big. You sort of can keep people, I think, younger. So that's a bit of a risk, I think.
It's almost there's a risk in both directions, in a sense that you could miss out on really maximizing the important transitional and social potentials of emerging adults, school leavers, what we would call young adults, 17 to whatever it is, 23, 24, 25. You miss out on really focusing that if you're also meeting the needs of too older, broader a group, that you miss out actually on the benefit of really targeted segmentation. As you said, Andy, if it's 18 to 25, that's already 7 years. That's heaps. That's a huge segment. And so to broaden that any further, you run the illusion of no longer actually targeting. Really, very.
I think just jumping on
that,
like one thing, this might not quite be a fair comparison, but there's a very different thing at my kids' church to the prep kid and the year 6 kid. Like, they're in the primary, but they are in 2 different worlds with 2 different needs. And that's exactly like the 18 and or the 17 and the 25, 24, 25. They're at those different ends, and they're really in very different places.
How much more 17 and 29?
Enormously. Enormously.
Yeah. And so it's worth going. That doesn't necessarily serve the emerging adult to be trying to run a ministry that meets all the needs of everyone from 17 to 30. I think that needs to be questioned for the benefit of this really crucial turning points. But also for this other group, it is helpful to go probably whatever it is, 25 to 30. Yeah, maybe there are some set needs there, but they're actually, I would suggest, actually quite diffuse. In previous ages, people would know about young workers ministries, singles ministries, young families ministries. There'd be these, and actually they all have legitimate function. Whether you need ministries for them all, that's a question. But it shows that they're quite different than experiences. Like a young worker is wrestling with a one package of experiences if they're leaving learning behind and really going into career building mode, particularly. That's one thing. Young family, obviously the sleepless nights, juggling kids, 9 p.m. becomes late in your mind, all that kind of stuff. Loneliness in different ways, all that kind of stuff. Looking for a partner that you'd love to have and not finding one is a different experience again, or coming to terms with maybe not finding one. All those experiences, they're a whole different set of needs and interests and experiences. They may have a place in terms of ministry purpose, maybe not. And I guess that's an important thing to notice, that there are needs there going on that the people in that time of flux, which is often can be quite a depressing time, actually, when you're going, oh, this life isn't all, my job isn't all I hoped it would be, or I didn't find a partner, or having a kid didn't solve my problems, or I can't get pregnant, or there's so many things in there that actually, that there's different pastoral needs. And the risk is using a young adult's ministry structure to meet needs that are actually kind of more personal, pastoral, social, just the job of church, and maybe instead go, yeah, we do need to care for the younger adults who are, rather than devote a separate ministry strategic silo to it. But also, as Andy said, there's an opposite potential thing of going, by that stage, you really do have potential leaders. And to put them in the category with 17 and 18-year-olds as just the kind of kids, the young adults, the young'uns, you're missing the opportunity to go, really, they're 25-year-old, 26-year-old is as much an adult as a 46-year-old. It's time to start actually getting them involved in the life of the church and empowering them, getting the older people to make room for them and get used to being led by older Gen Zers, and so on. All that kind of stuff. So there's actually there comes what's interesting, I think, is that if you go back a while, another way these things were often met were just by evening services. So you didn't have a midweek young adults group or young workers group, but you did have an evening service that would tend to have people gravitate towards it who didn't need the morning time slot for other, often children related reasons, or not wanting to drive at night reasons, so it would segment a bit that way and tend to have a lot of students, not middle-aged or singles, and often then empty nesters as well, who went, hey, my kids are grown up and actually I've got new energy and capacity and I would rather mentor some uni students than serve on creche. And so they actually then opt to kind of come in and be the aunties and uncles in the evening service, because of the ministering opportunities. So in some ways, it's, by creating these young adults groups, we're maybe missing out on the potential in the larger church dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would just probably just add it with these things. A risk is how are you siloing? Like, are you silo offing groups from the church? It is another part of it as well. I think that's a good thing to consider, how integrated are your various age groups, and how well do they integrate into, I think, the wider church. By that I mean you can keep a group almost siloed together, because actually in the bigger church you haven't created good transitions and integration systems, so that it can drive from, oh, well, if we don't kind of keep them in that group, well, we might lose them from church, so let's just keep extending this group out so that they'll keep hanging out, keep being mates, and they'll keep being safe, and they'll keep staying, and actually going, oh, you're accidentally siloing them off and you're trying to address a different issue by doing that. So I think thinking about what are those discipleship steps in your church, and how are you doing that well? Yeah, so I think that can be one possible scenario that I think is worth interrogating, like if you're a minister. But there's also lots of good reasons why that might not be the case whatsoever. Yep.
So an example of something that a church can do really well in this area is if they have an evening service that they've targeted, like, hey, this works really well for our singles, our aunties and uncles who want to invest in young people, those who are newly married, double income, including those people in the leadership team in planning for and integrating the creation of maybe an evening service, or going forward decision making that what might make this experience unique to the morning service. How do we welcome people uniquely in the evening service? If you're including the young people as it's a great leadership pipeline strategy, that if they are on the leadership team of the evening service, when their life situation changes, let's say kids come into the mix and it just works better for them to come to the morning service, they've got that experience to add, to bring new life to the morning experience too, and potentially on leadership teams, elder boards, boards of management, parish councils, and to think about it in terms of a pipeline like that, rather than we just have these set few people who are on the elder board who are only allowed to make those decisions. You're cutting out, like, eventually when you need a new elder and you put the word out, no one feels equipped or qualified because they've never been allowed to be in that space before.
Right. That's right. Yep. What we haven't, I mean, I've just scrolling through our list of things we wanted to cover, and we've covered a lot of ground, and I hope it's been helpful, and we'll parcel this up in different ways to get out some of these different bits down the track. But maybe the one thing we haven't hit on yet, and it's a good way to finish actually, is if things with UTAS are going to stay diffuse for a long time, if it's really no longer AFES ministry, Uni Fellowship of Christians ministry as it used to be, and if churches are, there are at least some churches, making a good go of ministering to this demographic, what is, if any, the additional value and benefit of an inter-church and actually interdenominational ministry like the Uni Fellowship of Christians? What contribution do we still feel we can make? I mean, Christine's talked about the people falling between the cracks. We can meet that need, yes. Are there other needs that there remains value, even perhaps for the churches who are doing a good job at this at the local level with their young adults groups? A place for us in this next, whatever it is, 10 years?
I mean, I think as uni workers, we and the organisation we work for, we're specialists in that we can provide a resource in leadership development and evangelism. We can create those spaces and times which churches can use, can fill with their people, and they get all the benefit of our time and energy, so that their people can grow and mature, and that's that kind of parachurch, right? The next to the alongside, helping and supporting the local church, and that's what we want to do, and we love doing, and that's great. So that specialist input, I think, is very useful. And then I think within that kind of specialist input, as that kind of happens, we're pulling from all these different denominations and individuals, and that will create a rich crossover of social groups, of theological thinking, of experience, of Christian and those who don't identify as Christian. And that's just really lovely. And though when that happens, people love it and they have a great time, and there is that cheesy "you're better together" element there. And that is just a learning experience in itself, by being surrounded by all these different people, and kind of learning together and learning to love well together as well. So that would be, I think, is two where it's just enriching in that way.
My local church has just gone through a stage of speaking with our members and reestablishing what our vision is, because we've kind of reached that, you know how churches, when they reach 80, you kind of need to like, hey, let's make sure we're all on the same page again. But we're at 220, and it's kind of a similar transition period. Let's remind ourselves what the main thing is the main thing. Are we doing that well? Where might we be lacking? And as a result, we've collated some really, really, really great content. One of the ways that our elders are thinking of this could potentially help us with hiring our next staff member. If we've got someone who is regularly responsible for the preaching of the word on Sunday and overseeing the Wednesday service, and then we've got someone who's doing sort of family discipleship type stuff, this conversation is helping us look at what this might look like, but that might be like a 5 to 10 years away thing. What I was seeing in those conversations is the role that Uni Fellowship might play in between that time. For example, one of the desires that came up was we would really love some training on particular topics. Well, like you said, Andy, we're specialists and our time is dedicated to teaching and training our students at a particular tertiary level. And so we can integrate some of this content that we're already delivering our students, and we can partner with local churches and delivering that type of training. So it's not becoming something that the church is looking at our elders and our ministers and saying, like, you do more. Like, the elders and ministers can be looking at their partners, their gospel partnerships in the community, and saying, okay, I am physically unable to meet this perceived need in my congregation. Who in our ecosystem can I bring on side to minister to my people in this way? We can be that.
Yeah, it's working out. You don't need to do everything together, like this kind of endless, let's do more unity for everything. Unity is always better. That's not so much that, is it? You find, when is it useful to do more stuff together? When does it bless and enrich the whole in some meaningful way? And yeah, training is clearly one of those. We've talked a lot about this transition time. And I think just as people recognize the value in combined large high school ministry work, or youth, like primary school camps over the summer camps and those kinds of things, we go, oh, some extra strategic investment there makes sense to do as in a concerted, combined way. I think we've made a good case that there's some key issues to this emerging adult category that's especially valuable for evangelism, for raising up leaders, for building community, for cementing faith, all that stuff. And so to give some extra attention there, to do it together, I think, yeah, is a strong case. And one of the things we've been pondering, especially in this season, post-COVID season for UTAS, is just the desire we have, the prayer we have, having seen this ministry in years gone by, to make sure that we help our current young adults and the emerging adults opt for more rather than enough. And so even if you're a church that has a pretty good, young adults group, 20, 30 people, that's great. But imagine if, together with other young adults groups in Hobart, they could sometimes enjoy 60, 70, 80, 90 people. Why would you opt for 20, 30, that's enough, when we could all enjoy 60, 70, 80? Why not opt for more? Like, what's the downside? So that's even with the church that feels like it's got a good thing going. Actually, in a sense, funnily, how much more could you then energize everything? I don't know, I see that with, say, like with EV Church and its involvement with Reach Australia. EV Church is well and truly self-contained and happy, and could do it could have its EV church planting network and consultancy service if it wanted. But instead it said, well, how much better would it be to share the love across denominations, across the country, in between churches, and even with other bigger churches, and do something that gives outward rather than just brands the EV flag or the FIEC denominational flag. And so that same spirit, right? That there's just how great a gift to give to our young adults, especially when their uni experience is narrower and more fragmented. And so they're not getting all that in the uni thing, like Christine said at the beginning, on the lawn, mingling with people from different faculties. They're getting less of that at uni. How much more reason then to opt more? And similarly, when it comes to training or evangelism or ministry, if our guys are doing a bit of evangelism with our church and a bit of ministry with our church, that's cool. But I guess we've seen, haven't we, and experienced ourselves, how great it is to do a whole lot of stuff when you're young, finding your gifts and got lots of connections. You get to try your hand at a range of ministries, get stretched, and you learn as you go, and multiple contact points for evangelism, not just the church program, but the parachurch program. And it all works together in synergy. Why not opt for more? And that's part of our heavy hearts, is when we go, oh, like that, even the ones who've got good stuff, we go, oh, it's just that. Wow. I guess we've seen how much young adults can get out of this time of life, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a bummer, how little they're content with in the 2020s. So we're kind of saying, with evangelism, with training, with ministry, we'd love as a city and a state to opt for more, rather than be satisfied with enough.
Yeah, it's not enough for our school leaver young woman. She's graduated from here 12. Like, what can we do with her in order to keep her in the faith? I know we'll stick her in the youth group as a youth leader, so that she can then benefit the year 7s, year 8s, the emerging young adults, and we'll have ticked that box. She's got spiritual formation and development that, she needs addressing, and opportunities to grow her in a faith beyond that youth group level. And we need to be thinking strategically about what that looks like uniquely for our 18-year-olds plus. And if a church isn't in the capacity to have a dedicated ministry to that age group, well, why fret about it and say, oh, well, we can't do it, when we've got Uni Fellowship, who is specialized, and we're begging you to bring your young people to us. It's not just one more thing that you have to do when you've got us that are begging for you to send us your young people, and we will grow and stretch them in ways that are suitable for their age and stage of spiritual development.
Yeah. And I mean, this relates to ministry apprentices and interns that, again, like Christine's saying, keen for ministry. So we give them an internship or an apprenticeship role. Brilliant. That's great. That's really excellent, proactive investing. And here's the opt for more, for them to both benefit from everything you do with your training and maybe what chosen training framework or denominational framework gives. We also say to them, hey, as part of your training, we'd love you to connect with a specialist group and be exposed to all these other practitioners and opportunities and conference input. Man, I look in on that and go, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you greenhouse, fertilize as much as you could? Opt for more with your trainees.
I think another angle, which is just the background reality of the uni fellowship ministry, the city that we live in, the state that we're in, is that UTAS is the only university, and however diffused it is the educational, multicultural, political, social hub of the city, that domestically we have 10,000 students, of basically all of those don't know Jesus. And as far as going, what is a strategic, necessary local mission field for our churches, of which our young people are in, then that's a pretty high priority in my mind, to go, wow, there's this space, there's this access to this, there's these people who want to reach this, and there's a high chance that your church is probably within a 5K radius of one of the buildings, at least. That becomes, for us Hobartians, actually just a really important mission field. And yeah, I want to see people be saved. Of course, I want to see young people interacting, socializing, growing, maturing. I want to see all of that taking place. But I also want to see this mission field of all these people that don't know Jesus being touched somehow by these young people.
Yeah, and we're seeing the best way to do that is tap it through networks. They're not going to tap it through a table at one of these many
Absolutely.
8 different sites. You do it. We'll keep doing a bit of that, but we're going to tap it mainly through networks. And the thicker a network of overlapping groups, friendship groups, study groups, social groups, sports groups, camping teams, the thicker that network, the better reach and for mission we'll be able to have. Absolutely, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And that's what's crucial about that is those relational networks and that age and stage, identifying as a young emerging adult, a young adult, that in my mind is the new place of UTAS. When you can no longer rely on, or we've just got massive question marks over the physical place of where the campus is, what becomes reliable, or where students are, or what it means to be a student is in this relational age group space. And so that is the kind of new mission field that we're primarily trying to reach, rather than trying to give out some hot cross buns or sausages from a barbecue to about 12 people across an hour and a half
at Sandy Bay campus. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that all then requires the devil's in the details in terms of then bridging these gaps with all these issues we've said requires a whole lot more proactivity from us, intentionality, us parents, the keen, switched on young adults who already get it all and are taking a lead, pastors, youth group leaders. All of us need to be proactive in doing our bit pretty consistently, actually. Like this is a discipline, not just to advertise once or twice. It requires work. I mean, we haven't even mentioned how social media has kind of decayed for this age group. I mean, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But yeah, anyway, so it's not even really you can reach them through Facebook as easily as you could 10 years ago. Facebook's where your auntie and uncle are. So we need more intentionality, absolutely. And part of that is actually some planning things. Often we undercut things not by our intention, but the plans we make. Double booking is an obvious one. There's a whole bunch of those things, aren't they? Over scheduling our church stuff, so there's just no room, really. That the young adults feel so busy, they don't have any space for any more diversity. Yeah, so there's a bunch of those things where, again, we just need to be really working at that together proactively to bring this about. And so, yeah, anyway, that's that's the challenge. A whole other conversation could be listing the 10 to 20 things that we can do to implement this in practice. But at the very least, this 90 minutes has been a pretty good conversation starter, I hope. Final thoughts, Christine? Anything you want to add before we sign off?
We love Jesus, and the reason why we're devoting our time and energy during the week is to help your students grow in their love for Jesus and give them the confidence to be able to talk about him in meaningful ways and real, authentic ways with their classmates, remember they're working 2 to 3 jobs, so with their colleagues at work and with their family at home and their siblings and their neighbors. And we would love for meaningful partnerships to come alongside of us to make that a possibility.
Yeah. Andy, final thoughts?
I don't have any final thoughts. Yeah, I want to see all those people reached and saved, and I don't want our young adults just to stay in their cohorts, in their little tribes, in their little gangs and in their little worlds, and you know, I want to see them reaching out and being well supported and enabled to thrive in that way. Yeah, so that we welcome more into the kingdom.
If we're praying that God will send people out of our churches into the mission field to the nations, why not start with our young people and pray and send our young people to the mission field of the UTAS campus and start there?
Yeah.
My final thought is, for anyone who's listened this far, is we've talked for 90 minutes that it's sufficiently complex and it's continuous change. It is what they call a paradigm shift in terms of thinking differently about what ministry will look like compared to perhaps previously with campus ministry. And so if you're really on board with this stuff, I reckon probably a second listen, or we'll love to happily have conversations with you in some other format. But actually, it will be sufficiently easy to forget, not fully grasp, wrestle with how to implement this stuff. Yeah, it is mind-blowing to us, just the change we've experienced and the things we've had to think through this last 5 years. So I guess that would be my final thought, is we've put this work into today because we thought it was worth really raising with you, and we'd love you to keep engaging with it either through this repeat content or with us directly, because we think it's really important and it's really complex. So let's keep chewing it over together prayerfully, and with that mission heart that Andy and Christine have left us with.